Welcome to Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland, and tonight we have a special guest tonight, Bruce Maccabee, a ufologist, a physicist. You've probably seen him on a number of UFO specials. This guy's been in the field for a long time. He gets down to the bare bones science of UFO witnesses. We're going to talk about the Kenneth Arnold sighting. He has a book out called 3 Minutes in June that I've been reading right now. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's really interesting for a UFO event that only took 3 minutes. It is a lot of proof in that incident for the life elsewhere, extraterrestrial life. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about he's the first person to get from the Freedom of Information Act the X-Files, you could call them, the actual FBI UFO files. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, we'll have open lines later in the show. You can ask Bruce some questions, but only one call-in line. That'll be the Soup Live Chat, 800 Live Chat. That's the Skype ID. And, of course, what we do every Sunday night is the World Wide Web of Weird. We'll be with you on doing that in just a sec. Welcome to another night of Paranormal Soup. I'm your host, Jason Bland. Tonight, we got, of course, my lovely co-host with us, Jamie D. Let me get that screen up so you can see. How you doing tonight, Jamie?
Doing good. I'm really excited about the guest tonight and hearing all this.
Yeah, and, we don't get to do a lot of UFO shows. We've had Derek Tyler was an awesome guest, but I want to do more, and there's two in a row. We got the Bruce Maccabee tonight, and then next week we'll be talking to Chad and Alta Dillard about being abducted in Louisiana, so that'll be next week. So we kind of have like a UFO month going on, so it's pretty cool. All right, and you know what we like to do every Sunday night is the World Wide Web of Weird, so let's go ahead and get rolling into that. We got some good stuff tonight. Tonight in the World Wide Web of Weird, we're going to start out with a Chinese Nessie. That's Loch Ness kind of Nessie, but it's not in a loch. It's in China. This comes from the Mirror. All right, from the Mirror here. Chinese Nessie filmed emerging from lake in creepy mobile phone footage as witnesses scream in horror. Let me get that video up. We're streaming tonight, of course, as usual, out to Facebook Live and to Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network. And for people just listening tonight, if you ever want to see these videos, I do have the videos up on our Paranormal Soup World Wide Web of Weird playlist. And I also later on just edit just the World Wide Web of Weird down to a video on our Facebook page and on YouTube, so you can always check it out later. So you can see the videos and photos and stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. Chinese Nessie filmed emerging from lake in creepy mobile phone footage as witness scream in horror. Now we're going to play the sound of them screaming and stuff, and it's all in Chinese anyways. Rumors of a Chinese Nessie are rife after reports an underwater monster was spotted emerging from a lake in China. Officials are believed to be investigating after mobile phone footage appeared to show a shadowy shape lifting its head out of the water. The eerie video has gone viral on social media with over 5 million views and shows a grainy image, of course, of what appears to be a beast now known as the Chinese Nessie. It's really grainy, and it's, of course, even more grainy when we share it on here. Like I said, you can check it out on YouTube, but I don't know. It just looks like a big swell, but you will hear these people. You see it like there's something moving in the middle of the circle. You kind of see something, but, it's not very detailed. I don't know, but it's interesting, what's getting stirred up over there in China in a lake. You wonder, we have Champ, we have Nessie, of course, there's going to be other places in the world that might have those kind of creatures. If those exist, why not in China? All right, let's move on to the next article. This comes from Unexplained Mysteries here. If my article will load, factory workers faint over ghost possession. Now, we've had countless stories about schools being, evacuated due to kids freaking out, saying they're possessed. And now it's happening not just in schools, it's happening at a workplace. Now, I've commented, maybe these kids have been trying to get out of school by acting like they're possessed. It's a possibility. It's like, hey, that kid's got out of school. Now, has it spread over to the workforce? Factory workers from faint over ghost possession. This was posted on Wednesday, August 9th. A garment factory in Cambodia was recently at the center of a case of mass hysteria involving 35 workers. The incident, which occurred in a factory at the Canada Industrial Park on Monday, was sparked by a rumor of suggesting that one of the workers had become possessed by a ghost. One by one, the other employees reportedly started to faint upon hearing the news and had to be taken to a private clinic to recover. By the time the day was over, 35 of them had taken ill. There was a news spreading amongst the workers that one of them was possessed by a ghost spirit and was yelling for chicken to eat, said Bun Van, chief of the Coalition of Cambodian Apparel Workers Democratic Union. This information scared the other workers and they started to faint one by one. All of them were sent for treatment at a private clinic near the garment factory. According to Mr. Van, this is not the first time something like this has happened either. At some garment factories in Canada Industrial Park, it happened more than 10 times already. He said some workers were brought to Takeo province to see Khmer magic sorcerers. In a few cases, owners of the factories bought chickens to sacrifice at pagodas. I guess this is something that's been happening in these factories. But you wonder, it's like, hey, so-and-so at the other factory, he got out of work for a week because they thought it was haunted or people were getting possessed. I don't know. Or maybe there's really stuff. It always seems to be, I've been waiting for something like, what does this happen in America? Is it a cultural thing? I don't know. And I'm not trying to be insulting. It's really interesting to me, these outbreaks of possession. I mean, it is definitely a different cultural perspective. They really do believe you can be possessed. I believe you can be too, but not everybody in this country does. So I don't know. It's really weird, these mass like possession or sicknesses or this hysteria that is caused by these kind of things. You just don't see that too much here in America or anything like that. Not since probably the Salem witch trials, But all right, let's move on here. This one's really cool. This is totally Star Trek, in my opinion. It's another one that comes from Unexplained Mysteries. Scientists create breakthrough healing device. This was on Tuesday, August 8th. Like I said, Unexplained Mysteries, known as tissue nanotransfication or transfection. Nanotransfection, okay, TNT. The technology can begin repairing injuries in less than a second. It might sound like something out of an episode of Star Trek, but according to scientists at the Ohio State University, this remarkable new technology can begin healing even the most serious of injuries almost immediately and has the potential to save many lives. Taking the form of a silicon chip that simply needs to be placed on the patient's skin, the healing system injects genetic code into the cells, turning those cells into other types of cells. With what this means is that if someone has injured their leg, or for example, the chip could turn some of the patient's skin cells into vascular cells to help repair the damage. In one recent laboratory experiment, the team was able to restore brain functionality in a mouse that had suffered a stroke by using technology to turn some of its skin cells into brain cells. With no known side effects and with the capacity to be deployed pretty much anywhere without training, the silicon patches could revolutionize the treatment of injuries and diseases. The team is currently waiting FDA approval to begin human trials later this year. It seems so quick. Could it be dangerous, though? I mean, if it could turn any cells into something else, it sounds like it could be dangerous. And then, of course, you got the anti-chip people, which I totally get, because I say hell no to a lot of these things about people getting chips, like companies implanting chips in their employees. This thing shouldn't be permanent. It would heal you, but it's more about this technology and chips that I know scares some people. And me a little bit too, but I'm also somebody that's not going to cringe away from discovering a new way to heal somebody or save lives. So this could be really cool. I love the Trek. I love the Star Trek.
Especially after it's gone on for a little bit, you could see how everybody else is doing with it and think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it sounds so cool. I mean, because you see them in Star Trek with like a tricorder, and they just like hold it up to the injury, and it like starts to heal itself or something like that. You know, I love sci-fi. I love the idea of the future of Star Trek and all that, and it'd be great, you know, especially to talk about for the brain what it could do to heal the brain. But how do they get it inside the brain? I don't know. But
That would be incredible.
we're advancing every day with this stuff, and it's amazing and awesome and scary too. Okay, let's move on to article number 4. We talked about this on the World Wide Web of Weird a few weeks ago. And this has been totally viral. I'm sure a lot of people watching the show right now have seen this. Is possessed China doll strikes again. This is from Daily Mail Online. Mother sells it for 1,000 pounds on eBay after it scratched her husband, only for the new owner to claim his father has now been attacked too. Let me see. Here we go. A haunted doll flogged on eBay after it left its owner terrified and covered in scratches has struck again. Debbie Merrick's creepy figure appeared on ITV this morning after she revealed its spooky antics, which including setting off fire alarms and removing its own necklace. Lee Steer from Rotherham, South Yorkshire, bagged the coveted creepy item for 866 pounds after a tense international bidding war between paranormal enthusiasts. Jeez. But just 2 days after the doll arrived at the 30-year-old paranormal investigator's home where he lives with his parents, Paul and Amy Steer, it struck again. Lee's father, Paul, 54, discovered scratches on his arm, mimicking those supposedly inflicted on Debbie's partner that were thought to be the same size as a doll's hand. Jeff should pull up a picture here in a second of what the guy's arm was with the scratches. My dad was downstairs in the morning at this point. The doll was still packed away, and he heard like a tapping noise on wood, he said. It was a bit unusual. There's the picture of his arm. For people on Late Night in the Midlands listening in and can't see, he's holding on his arm in this picture. You can see this really weird scratch. It almost looks like he was trying to write something, kind of like a rune symbol or something in his arm. It's really, you can definitely tell it's a scratch. Lee said, my dad was downstairs in the morning at that point. The doll was still packed away, and he heard like a tapping noise on wood. He said it was a bit unusual. Later that day, he was watching the repeat of one of our live streams with the doll. I was doing a live stream upstairs in my room. And then he said to my mom, my arm's hurting. He lifted up his sleeve, and he had 6 scratches on his arm. My mom shouted at me, Lee, you best get downstairs. Your dad's getting affected. He's got scratches on him. It seems pretty similar to the scratches on Debbie's husband, the original owner, from what I can tell. We have no idea where they came from. Lee's father, Paul, 54. Oh, here we go. My dad is a believer. He said he's not happy with it being in his house. Yeah, you live at home, and you're going to buy haunted dolls or haunted objects. You best get your own place. That's what I think. And this isn't the only odd experience Lee claims to have said since bringing the doll home into his home, with more strange noises, flickering lights, and broken artifacts all noted. Lee said, we're putting stuff away that weekend before it arrived and started talking about it, and all of a sudden a picture I have on my wall called The Crying Boy started swinging on its own. We've gone months without anything unusual happening, and as soon as this doll was mentioned, things started to happen. I have another picture propped up on the floor in the dark. I could hear the sounds, and when I put the light on, it looked and the picture frame had completely dismantled itself. We did a live stream opening of the doll that 35,000 people watched. Wow. And a light I used was flickering. It was like a strobe. It was the first time that had ever happened, and people contacted me saying they could see the doll's eyes moving. I've used random words apps that some people believe spirits can manipulate, ITC, which we do on the show. When I've asked it, it said its name is Samantha. When I said really wanted to piss it off, it said Strike Lee. It's a random words that it shouldn't be making sense. Strike Lee, of course, struck his father. This article you can find on the Daily Mail online. I don't want to read the whole thing. It's pretty long. But, haunted dolls, I believe, are possible. I believe objects can hold energy and stuff. This person bought this doll originally with 2 other dolls that looked pretty much alike, but she felt it was this doll that would do weird stuff, move, take its necklace off. There's a lot of scammers out there, though, with these haunted dolls and stuff. People want to look. They had a bidding war on this once it got popular. It makes me mistrust any of the stories I hear about haunted dolls. We'll have to keep an eye on this one and see what happens. I mean, these people could. I'm not. I don't know these people, but you have to consider the possibility that okay, we got the doll. It's not haunted. What do? We want our money back. Well, let's say it's haunted and say you got scratched, and let's make it go. The bid go higher. I mean, I'm just pointing out something.
It's that kind of stuff that gives paranormal, it makes everybody start second guessing, and you always have that in the back of your mind when you look at evidence or look at a story.
Yeah. And Rob Autry has just joined us too tonight. How you doing tonight, Rob?
Pretty good, pretty good.
For people to check out, last night, Bill Perry, check out Pumpkinhead Paranormal's YouTube channel. Rob and Bill and Jamie were streaming, and right where we're looking at Rob here, you could see a shadow move behind him during that live stream. I saw it, and it was saying focus and window and all that, and then right on that window, we saw the shadow move. So check that out on Bill Perry's Pumpkinhead Paranormal YouTube channel. It's pretty awesome. We'll have to look at that at the next ITC show, which won't be this month. It'll be the next month after. All right, so we need to move on here. This is going to be number 5 of the articles. We only got 2 more here. So this next one, let's see here, is going to be from Beyond Reality News, Unexplained Mist filmed at the Lizzie Borden house. This is also the videos from Paranormal Globe. Let's see here. Reddit users Zilgid, I don't know how to pronounce how he says his name, shared a video on Reddit, of course Reddit, to try to find an explanation in what is unexplained mist that could be that he filmed while staying at the Lizzie Borden house in Massachusetts. Zilgid, I'm totally probably butchering it, explained that they had the whole house to themselves while staying overnight at the B&B as guests. They decided to explore the house and film it on their phone, but they never expected to capture mysterious mist in the bedroom. Around 55 seconds mark, you can see a mist hovering above the bed, above the pillow, near the bedside lamp. He said that they could actually see the mist while they were filming it, so if that's true, it could rule out light glare on the camera. So that was one of the things I looked at it, and I thought, before I read the article, I said, well, that could be light glare because you can see the lamp right there, and it looks like light glare coming off it. Now, if we take their word for it, which we could, then if they saw it with their own eyes, then it wouldn't be light glare. Light glare will happen with the camera. It won't happen so much with you looking at it with their eyes. So if they're seeing this mist and recording it, then, okay, I get it. The audio in it, I don't want to play, but you can hear it, and you listen to them talk about it. So they were seeing it. So that kind of rules out that being light glare, so it's something weird. They went back 30 minutes later, but the mist was no longer there. Some Reddit comments believe it could actually be a spirit, while others believe it to be just a glare from the lamp. One Reddit user commented, "Holy, what? Now I'm canceling my trip. I'm supposed to go there." No, that makes me want to go. If we're going to go to Lizzie Borden house, don't you want to go and see ghosts? I don't know. In 1892, for people who don't know, Lizzie Borden was accused of murdering her father and stepmother with an axe in their home. Though Borden was acquitted, her name is still synonymous with a gruesome murder that, to this day, remains unsolved. The Lizzie Borden house is known for being haunted and spooky goings-on. Visitors have experienced noises being heard, floors creaking with no one around, and doors opening and closing by themselves. I still look at it. It looks just like classic light glare off the lamp, but like I said, if they're seeing it with their eyes, it wouldn't be. I don't know what you guys think of it.
Look at the way it's reflecting off the wall, too. The way the lamp, it just looks like the light is being pulled somehow and reflected off the wall, off the lampshade.
Yeah, it's odd, but
it's
looks
odd,
like light
yeah.
glare. It does look like light glare, but like I said, if it's true, they saw it with their own eyes. You kind of hear them talk a little bit, but it's not really straightforward if they say they're seeing it or not. I don't know. It just, if they saw it with their own eyes, I get it. It's definitely a mist. It's something, But I mean, it's cool.
I agree.
I watched that Christina Ricci, Lizzie Borden thing. It's totally not historical at all, but it was entertaining. But I always found the Lizzie Borden unsolved murders. I love that kind of stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Me too. I've always wanted to go there.
Yeah, it's definitely on my bucket list of places I'd want to see. All right, last up, since we're talking UFOs, I saved this for last on the World Wide Web of Weird. This comes from the SquamishChief.com, local news website for town of Squamish. Large UFO caught on video in Squamish. Visited. Well, that's not it. That's what we're going to talk later tonight. Is the Kenneth Arnold case. That's that link I gave you, Jeff. You can get it from YouTube. He's trying to pull it up here. Hopefully he gets it, because this video is pretty cool. Crap. I hope he can get it up here. It's on my Paranormal. There it is. That's it. All right. Large orb captured on video near the Squamish. Now, they totally spell it differently in this article than they do it. Squamish Chief has excited documentary and researchers from London, Ontario. Rob Freeman and Marcus McNabb have traveled to 11 countries and 30 cities in the past 3 years, determined to record what is out there and after being inspired from a childhood experience. Freeman, a senior field researcher for the Center for the Scientific Studies of Atmospheric, I cannot talk, anomalies, said the sighting is best footage they have recorded to date. This is such a fascinating path that we're on, Freeman said. Most people have no idea what is happening in this world. The pair initially started out to make a documentary, but McNabb now describes it as a movement. To collect data, the crew used night imaging technology spanning electromagnetic spectrum to see the visible and invisible, as was the camera finally called the weapon of mass detection. When the crew arrived in Squamish on July 22nd, a stranger at the Britannia Mine gift shop told them special things shine on the tree trail. It was breathtakingly majestic, Freeman said on the rock face. As night fell, they entered the forest. Soon after, he said, a giant sphere of light moved across the sky and descended into the woods. At first, we thought it was an airplane, Freeman said. This was absolute, but it had absolutely no sound. Then we absolutely knew it was no airplane. The sighting was brief, but Freeman recorded about 10 seconds after rummaging for gear. The trees behind the orb were all lit up, he explained. That means it was in front of the trees. They planned the trip to BC, British Columbia, specifically to meet Charles Lamrou, a Vancouver-based online skywatcher featured in a local news report. Documents an unexplained phenomena, often seen them moving over Cyprus and towards Horseshoe Bay. He made his own film, Nocturnal Lights, and is currently working on a paranormal program. Orbs can vary in size, known to blink amber or white when zipping off, he explains. I've always been interested. I mean, I think orbs like this, or if this is not an airplane or a helicopter and they're saying there's no sound, I think... And I've seen the video. There really is no sound. You hear them talking. There's something else, like, because the Native Americans talked about this kind of stuff. They've seen these lights, and there's a lot of these ghost lights like this. This one's really bright.
Look how it floats through the tree, like the way it's almost stopped and like floated through the tree.
I think this is pretty credible footage, but
yeah, it didn't like just keep going.
Is it something else than an ET flying a craft? Is it something more interdimensional? Or ghost
That's
light.
almost how it feels like to me when I look at it.
Yeah.
It's so bright, though.
It is very bright.
Pretty cool looking.
So, I mean, I don't know what that could be, but it's perfectly round. It's completely
What were those
bright.
3 lights at the big, those other little reflections?
I don't know. But it's interesting, and this is one of the best video footages I've seen of what people call, like, ghost lights or, the Indian lights. So, it'd be interesting if they get anything more while they're doing this. It's a really interesting video. Like I said, for people listening on Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, you can find this, the World Wide Web of Weird, on our Paranormal Soup YouTube channel. It usually comes up about 2 or 3 days after the show. I have a video up of just the World Wide Web of Weird. And the videos are always linked on our Paranormal Soup World Wide Web of Weird playlist on our YouTube channel. So check it out there. And for people watching on Facebook, you can, if you have trouble watching on Facebook, you have internet problems or whatever, you maybe do better with internet radio, you can go to Late Night in the Midlands radionetwork.com and listen there, or on TuneIn to Late Night in the Midlands, and just listen to the show if you can't watch it. So always check that out. All right. Well, I cannot wait. We've got to get to our first commercial break because I want to get back to our guest, Bruce Maccabee. We'll talk about UFOs and the Kenneth Arnold first sighting that coined the term flying saucer. Of course, I got to figure out why my music's not playing. Weird. Huh. Usually I have music playing.
UFOs have taken over
It's
control.
taking over my thing here. Huh. That is weird. Yeah. Let me see what's going on here. Usually we cut into a break and music would play, and for some reason I'm having an issue. There we go. And for people wondering, you can only hear the music on Late Night in the Midlands Radio Network, so you'll hear a little bit of quiet, and then we'll be back. You'll hear some commercials, and then you'll be hearing us come back. All right, guys, be with you in just a sec. All right, tonight we're going to have our guest, Bruce Maccabee, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, I should say. He has been in the field for a long time. I've seen him on a number of documentaries about UFOs. His approach is completely scientific. I've been reading his books, 3 Minutes in June, That Changed the World, about the Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting. It's been completely interested. I'm sucked in. Definitely highly recommend that book. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, or maybe a lot, because I'm really interested in this story. It's the story that coined the term flying saucer. All right, guys, we'll be with you in just a sec. You there with us, Bruce?
I am here with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a true honor to have you on the show. I was just talking.
Thank you for having me.
The amount of research you do, the scientific approach that you take to UFO sightings. You're probably the first real solid ufologist I've had on here when it gets down to the science. That's what I'm loving about your book, 3 Minutes in June, about the Kenneth Arnold sighting.
You actually learn how to do investigations.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I suck at math. I said I'm awful at math, but you seem to make it pretty simple to understand.
Well, also, more generally speaking, it shows you how to analyze statements and arrive at conclusions as to whether something is true or not. And in particular, I tackle a whole bunch of explanations that have been offered and show where they fall apart.
Now, Bruce, you worked for the Navy, and you were a physicist. Give us a little bit of your background. I know it's separate from your ufology, but tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was interested in science in general, and then when I graduated from high school, I went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts for 4 years, got a BS in physics, and then I went to American University in Washington, D.C. for 6 years to get a PhD in physics. Then I went to work for the Navy. I hadn't expected to spend my whole life there, but I ended up working for the Navy for 36 quarter years on various projects having to do with anti-submarine warfare and space-based weapons and all sorts of things like that.
Cool stuff.
I got interested in the UFO subject in the middle 1960s when I was at American University, and probably would have done no more than read books about it if it hadn't been for the fact that NICAP, the National Investigating Committee on Aerial Phenomena, had its headquarters right down in Washington, D.C., and I went to a lecture given by a couple of the NICAP guys at the university in the fall of '68, I think it was. And they said, well, we can always use help in our office, help answering letters and stuff like that. So I went there expecting to see a big organization because the NICAP was in all the UFO books,
right,
being the largest organization at the time. And it turned out to be a row house, second floor apartments crammed with papers and run by a broken down little old lady, Isabel Davis, who was really quite a smart cookie. And all of the people who had been there, the men who had been there working on various aspects, had all left by that time I got there. Anyway, that put me in contact with some of the local investigators. And I actually went on some UFO investigations in the late 60s, early 70s with the other people, and found out that a lot of these cases are not, obviously not hoaxes or delusional or whatever. There were serious people who had seen something or other. And in 1969, of course, everybody knows their history, knows that the Project Blue Book that had started as Project Sign in 1948 and Project Grudge in 1951, and then Project Blue Book from 52 all the way to 69. Project Blue Book in 69 was closed, and there was a general feeling of the general press and the public that the whole subject was over by that time.
Right.
Everything had been explained, and nobody was going to be paying attention to UFOs. The people who were in NICAP and other UFO organizations knew that wasn't true, that there were sightings there. But then all of a sudden in 1973 it was, we're back, and major sightings with the Hicks and Parker abduction. And by the way, I just read today testimony of a guy who just came forward for the first time recently on being another witness to UFO in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And there was also the famous what I call the helicopter case in Ohio, where the helicopter was lifted by some green object and then zipping overhead.
Was that the one with the
there
police?
were a whole bunch of sightings
Yeah.
in '73, and it was clear that the UFO subject hadn't gotten away, so it had not gone away. So I decided to try to do something unique myself, and one of the first things I tackled was the only photographic sighting that is in the so-called Scientific Investigation of Unidentified Flying Objects, the Conman Report, that was published in 1969. And that was the only case that was endorsed by the Condon Committee. Photo analyst was the Trent case. And it always struck me as funny that he writes in his conclusion that all factors investigated seem to point towards the idea that an extraordinary flying object had passed within the sight of two witnesses. Now, if this were normal science, and somebody came to a conclusion like that, which is off the wall, shall we say,
Right.
from the point of view of conventional science, you would think that other scientists would have picked up on it and either confirmed or destroyed that guy's claim.
Right.
Instead, nobody did anything, so far as I could tell. By 1974, there hadn't been any independent analysis of William Hartman was the guy who did the analysis. There had been no independent evaluation of his analysis by scientists using what were then modern techniques in those days. So I decided, well, maybe I'll try myself, and managed to get a hold of the original negatives by a fluke of good luck, I guess. And from then on, I began actual photographic analysis of UFO cases. I've done a lot of them since then, of course. And the Trent case that I was just talking about, the 1950 photos, are probably the most close to being, if not the most famous photos in the subject, because they've been published for so many times,
Right.
by so many people as illustrations of what they're talking about. But anyway, I continued investigating the Trent case, the Gemini 11, September 1966 object that went by the Gemini 11 space capsule with Conrad and Gordon in it.
I love that. Anything to do with astronauts spotting a
I
UFO.
this is all on my website, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to Brumac, BRUMAC .mysite, MYSITE.com, brumac.mysite.com. And you can find a lot of stuff there, including the Skylab 3 sightings and photographs of a red object in September of 1973. And that's a real unknown, because guess what? There are no red satellites.
Right.
For whatever this was, it was clearly red, because red is clearly captured on the film itself. I mean, it looked red to the astronauts, and it was red, and it was not a question of being reddened by the atmosphere at sunset, going into sunset as the spacecraft went around the Earth. It was red itself, either radiating it or somehow painted red so that it reflected red light. But anyway, I analyzed the 1976 Iran jet case.
Oh, that's really interesting.
1978, December 1978, UFO sightings in New Zealand. The 1986 Boeing 747 Japan Airlines 1628 case, which has become famous because the guy who was in charge of the FAA investigation, the Federal Aeronautics Administration investigation, Callahan, went public in the middle 90s with his what he knew about it. I had already published a huge paper on the subject, and nobody paid much attention. But when he came forth and said he agreed that something weird had happened,
Didn't he? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bruce, but didn't he say something about the military, CIA, somebody confiscating all their material and information on what happened with that?
Yeah, he started talking about that he started talking about 10 years after the sighting,
Yeah.
after the analysis. It was in November of 1986, and the FAA announced they were going to investigate in early January of 1987, and the FAA investigation was over by March of 1987. My analysis was still going on. Now, this is in the book, the FBI-CIA UFO connection. The reason it's in there is because there was a CIA connection.
Right.
I was the connection.
Oh, really?
I had been discussing the UFO subject with some people at the CIA who were interested in the subject for a number of years by that time. And I told this one guy that when the FAA announced it was going to do an investigation, I said to him, I could do a better investigation.
I bet you could.
Well, so guess what? And I said, I could do a better investigation, but I don't have any data. I couldn't, the FAA had everything. So he got me copies of everything.
Wow.
And I was able to write the paper that I wrote basically argues that there probably was something out there that was really weird.
Well, it was massive, if I remember right. We're talking about the one that was really, really large. I mean, it was massively
Yeah,
big.
I don't know that part, which is the last part of the sighting.
Mhm.
I'm a little bit doubtful of. There was only one witness to it, the pack captain himself, looking out the left-hand window.
Right.
But the previous stuff, the very beginning of the sighting, when two objects just sort of zipped in front of the 747 traveling at 600 miles an hour, two objects zipped in front of it, and just sort of paced the plane at maybe a few thousand feet in front of it. And all the crew, the three crew members, all saw that. There was definitely something there. It wasn't Mars and Jupiter, which is what the
Right.
skeptics claimed. And it wasn't moonlight on clouds and ice crystals.
You wonder.
So anyway.
You said that you don't know about the last part of it. You wonder, did he see it or
Well,
did he add it in?
the captain was the only one to see what he called the silhouette of a gigantic spaceship.
Right.
And he asked to descend, and the air traffic control center wanted him to make a big circle, so that and then they might be able to see something. He might be able to see something that had been behind him if he pulled the loop. But of course, it takes so long to take one of these big aircraft to make a circle that anything that was following behind would easily get out of view just by moving sideways a little bit.
Right.
It was during that turn, though, that the military guys who were watching this on their special equipment said they saw a flight of two, which was essentially meant that they were getting the Boeing 747 and something else.
Right. Right.
Well, anyway, I have done a number of sightings analyses since then. You can see all this stuff on my website.
Now, you mentioned this being part of your book, FBI CIA Connection to UFOs. You were one of the first, or you were the first, weren't you, to get the actual FBI files from the Freedom of Information Act about what they had on UFOs?
That's right. The Freedom of Information Act came out in 1975, or became in enforcement. And about the same time, the Project Blue Book files had been transferred onto microfilm and became available in the National Archives. If you wanted to go to the archives, you could read through these massive numbers of 90-some rolls of film, 100 and some thousand pages of stuff, they said. I don't know. I never counted. But anyway, in 1974, I began my investigation of the Trent case, and I was primarily interested in the optical part, the photographic part, but also I had to get the best testimony, and they had various newspaper articles and stuff, but I wanted to get direct testimony, so I actually called up and talked to Mrs. Trent many times over a period of several years. And it was during that time that I got the pictures. Well, now, when I I never talked to Mr. Trent directly, but I did get testimony that he had given to other people. And one of the things he said was that he had been at work and two FBI men came out and questioned him about the photos. And Edward Ruppelt, who wrote the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, the first real book on the subject by somebody who might know what was going on. He was the head of Project Blue Book in 1952 and 53. Ruppelt said that the FBI had never been interested in the subject.
Right.
Something like that is what he said in his book. So when I got this information on Trent saying that he had been interviewed with the FBI, I thought, well, what the hell, take a chance. Probably won't get anything, but I wrote to the FBI and asked if there was any information that they had on Paul Trent. And they had a 10-day requirement to respond, so 10 days later I get a letter saying your request is number 36,400 or something like that. I figured, well, sometime in the next decade or century I would get some response. To my great surprise, 6 months later in May of '77, I got a phone call at work from a FBI guy who was as equally surprised as I was to find that there was anything there, and he said 1,600 pages of stuff. Wow. So I started getting copies of pages of the FBI file way back in 1977. And the most recent version of the book, the FBI-CIA UFO Connection, is based in large part on the FBI documents. The FBI acted like a window on the Air Force in a sense. The Air Force would talk to the FBI and tell them stuff. The FBI was like a black hole. Information went in and nothing came out. Right. At least not until the Freedom of Information Act. And I suspect that there were some things that were in the FBI file that the Air Force didn't want us to know. Like in 1952, a big flap year, the FBI was told that there were people, top-level people, seriously considering the interplanetary hypothesis. And if that had come out, been made public, that could have changed things right there. But instead, the Air Force stuck to the, there's nothing to it. All the way from the time that Arnold's first sighting was first sighting to be publicized. Right. Soon after, the Air Force said, well, it wasn't ours. And then they began trying to poo-poo the whole thing. And, of course, we have the Roswell case where they sort of pulled the rug out from under UFO investigation by, first of all, claiming that they had the goods on UFOs. We had one. And then they said, well, it wasn't that. It was a weather balloon. So people can make mistakes, they say. And that was all I needed to do was to squash the whole subject.
Well, when you first started into this field, most people didn't even really know about Roswell. That didn't come out till many years later. Right.
But it was, as I said, they pulled the bait and switch sort of by first of all saying that they had the goods, a real flying saucer. Right. And everybody at that point knew what had been claimed by Arnold, 1,200 mile an hour object flying, flipping and flashing, and circular and mostly circular in shape and so on. That's what they expected the Air Force to say. Well, we got one of these flying saucers. Instead, the Air Force said, well, it wasn't. It was a weather balloon. The implication being that even the Air Force investigators couldn't tell whether something was a flying saucer or a weather balloon. made Jesse Marcel look pretty stupid.
Yeah, I mean, they basically set him up.
Right.
You know, you can see it, and I swear you see it on his face in that classic famous picture of him like, what is this? Why am I holding this up? Like, you're kidding me. Like, I would not know what this was.
Am I doing what I'm supposed to do, sir? Yes, sir. I'll do anything you want, sir.
That's military. Yeah, exactly. He had to.
You know, a funny sort of thing is I started off with this subject as a physicist, looking at physics. And the first physics I looked at really was optics and photography. And I learned a lot about stuff by analyzing the Trenton case. But I have spent probably more time doing history. Writing these books is certainly sort of a, well, the FBI, CIA, UFO connection is largely a history book.
Oh, yeah.
Although I've got some technical analysis in there, and at the very end, the last case that I talk about, the last one that I presented to the FBI, the CIA, by the way, it was about a magnetic field case. It was totally bizarre. And it happened. It was impossible, but it was there.
What was it? You said magnetic field.
Well, a case that occurred in Florida in 1992, I think it was, about this lady on a Friday night drives to her house, and from behind her house, as she's driving in the driveway, she sees go up into the sky this circular object, classic UFO type thing. And now her husband comes home later, and she tells him, and he had many years previously had what he thought was a UFO experience, when something went past over his car, and he said this thing went over his car, and all the needles and the gauges suddenly wiggled, and he thought that was an effect of magnetism. Well, he was happened to be a guy who owned oil fields and stuff, and he was into oil field, the way they're made. You drill a hole down a certain depth, put a casing in, and the casings are usually steel, and you cap it off, and you may put in a whole bunch of holes in a certain area, simply wildcatting sort of, to find something. You have now a bunch of steel pipes that might be 4 or 5 feet underground, and you have, if you find that one of these actually has something in it that you want, you got to go and find it. So you have a magnetic field detector. There are several types that you can go and buy. You get a magnetic field detector that detects the distortion of the Earth's field due to the presence of a big piece of steel. And so he was accustomed to doing that. When his wife talked about this object, apparently it was behind their house, he decided he'd go out and investigate behind the house to see if there's any remnant magnetic field or whatever might be there. He had a reasonably sensitive detector, a field gradient magnetometer it's called. And he started walking around. There was a little pond in his backyard, a few hundred feet from the house, or 100 feet from the house maybe. And he noticed in the pond that there were it was a couple of feet deep, maybe 3 or 4 feet. There was grass, pond grass stuff growing upwards, and most of it, but in three circular areas, this pond grass had been pressed down, he noticed.
Right.
And he also found areas where his magnetic field detector detected a huge gradient in the magnetic field. Such a huge gradient that I was told by a guy who worked where I did he worked for the Navy too, at the laboratory. He was into magnetics. The Navy's interested in magnetics because of magnetic mines. You want to be able to create the most sensitive magnetic mine for the offensive point of view. The defensive point of view, you want to figure out how to counteract the magnetic field so that the ship is undetectable by a magnetic mine. Well, this guy who was a professional in that anti-mine warfare type of stuff told me that the field gradient that was measured by this guy was equivalent to being 10 or 20 or 30 feet in front of a destroyer.
Wow.
Well, like I said, that's one of those things that is impossible, but it was recorded on video. You can hear the field gradient magnetometer generated an acoustic pitch, an acoustic noise,
Right.
a variable pitch, and the pitch goes up the higher the magnetic gradient. And this is all recorded by a guy who was videotaping the guy whose wife saw the object.
Right.
He had the field gradient magnetometer. He's walking around, and you hear it. Another guy, a MUFON investigator, there were two of them that investigated this sighting, is videotaping. So you see the man waving the wand around. At the same time, you hear the tone being generated. And there were places where the tone was generated so highly that it was getting almost to the limit of the system to detect it.
Wow.
But anyway, that's a physics situation. You end up having to do history even for a sighting that involves physics, because writing what happened during the sighting is a exercise in history, creating a history. And the New Zealand sightings of December 1978, there were so many things that happened that took a number of different histories of the events to put the whole thing together. A lot of people think that you can just go in and put a few facts together and ignore most of the history, and that's wrong. You've got to get the history straight first, then you can try to decide what might be the cause of the sighting, or if it's unexplainable. That's why I was so careful in this 3 Minutes in June
Right.
book, careful in the analysis of the what Kenneth Arnold said. In the book, you get what Kenneth Arnold said a couple of days after the sighting. He was interviewed on the radio. Then a couple of weeks after the sighting, he was asked to send a report to the Air Force, and so he wrote the Air Force report. And a couple of years after the sighting, he wrote what was in the book Coming of the Saucers in 1952. And then the fourth version of his sighting, or the fourth recitation of it, and the 1977 conference put on by Fate magazine, which was the last conference that he attended, and he gave at that conference a recitation of the sighting. All four of these recitations are essentially the same.
Yeah.
He
You
didn't
compare
build
them.
on it. He didn't amplify. He didn't become grandiose. He didn't talk about stuff that little green men waving at him as they flew by or anything like that. He kept it as scientific and observation-based as he could.
Well, let's get into a little bit, too, for people that are not familiar with the Kenneth Arnold sighting. It happened in June of 1947. Tell people a little bit, it was 3 minutes, let's name your book, 3 Minutes in June. Tell a little bit people what actually happened that day in June.
Well, a straightforward history of it starts off with Arnold flying. Well, first of all, he flew in a small airplane that had been specially designed for mountain flying, and he sold and installed fire control equipment in the state of Washington, Oregon, and areas of Idaho, various areas around like that. And he used his airplane to fly from one place to another for business meetings and whatever. So anyway, he had been flying at a place called Chehalis, Washington, to do some work there. And then he got in his airplane and he flew. He was going to fly to Yakima, Washington. He took a temporary detour as he went past Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is 14,400 feet high in the southeastern area of the state of Washington and the Cascade Range of mountains. And those many mountains, many of them are volcanic. Mm-hmm. And he was looking for a crashed military transport plane that they thought had crashed on the side of Mount Rainier in December of '46. and there was a $5,000 reward for it, so he flew around. The point is, that if it hadn't been for that, he probably wouldn't have been at the right place at the right time, but he was at the right place at the right time. He
Seemed to be the right person for it.
Yeah, also the right person. He made a pass along the side of the mountain to heading west, and got to a place called Mineral, Washington, where he made a U-turn. He's now southwest of Mount Rainier. He made a U-turn and was heading back east to go to Yakima, Washington. And he said the weather was great for flying. It was a sunny day. Sun was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was above and behind. This is the 24th of June, so it's only a couple of days after the summer solstice. And he was sitting back and enjoying the ride, as it were, when all of a sudden there's a bright flash in his airplane, on the surface of the airplane and even in the cockpit, according to him. And his first thought was that he had somehow gotten too close, or he had been buzzed by a fast jet. Somebody, some hot dog pilot was trying to scare him or something.
Right.
So he started looking around for this airplane. He assumed it was a reflected sunlight into his airplane, and onto his airplane. He saw a DC-4 about, he thought 15 miles northwest of him, heading northward. He could see that plane apparently clearly enough to see the wings and the fuselage and the tails and stuff like that. And but that wasn't flashing, so he looked around some more, and then he noticed flashes coming from his far to the north, his left side. He's heading east, and these flashes are coming from the north, at his right. And as he first saw these things, he thought it was like a chain of geese flying sometimes in a echelon formation. And but he realized almost immediately that they weren't geese because they were so far away he could see them, but they were traveling at such a high rate of speed. And he watched them for 15, 20 seconds, I suppose, and decided they were flying on a straight line, roughly. It would take him between him, on the west side of Mount Rainier, between him and Mount Rainier, and then they would pass southward. If they kept it in a straight line, they would go past Mount Adams, about 50 miles south of him, 50 miles roughly from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams. So he said pilots are always talking about how fast their airplanes can travel and stuff. And he thought, well, these must be some type of new aircraft by the Army Air Force. And he would try to see if he could measure their speed. He knew he had two geographical points that he could. Mount Rainier itself, 25 miles to his northeast, and Mount Adams about 50 miles south of him. And he could time how long it took him to go past Mount Rainier and then get down to Mount Adams. Well, as he watches these things coming along, he realizes that there's something funny about them. They don't look like airplanes that he's familiar with. There's no wings of the general T shape of an aircraft is not there. There's no wings, no fuselage, no tail wing, no vertical stabilizer, and no engines. Instead, what he sees is these things rock back and forth, left and right. They look like a very thin, dark line when he's looking on edge on. When they tilt upwards, you can see it was semicircular with a convex triangular rear end. Like if you took a pie plate or something and cut it in half and put a triangular rear on the pie plate. And these things were flying in a very funny manner, skipping along like skipping a stone on the water. Well, he looked at these, and he looked at them, and he compared the size of these objects with the size of the airplane, the DC-4 that he could see, He thought concluded that they might be 60 feet long. My own analysis of what he said suggests they might be 80 to 100 feet from front to back. But in any case, they were sizable objects. He knew they had to be sizable for him to be able to see them at 20-some miles away. Couldn't see geese that far.
There's no way you would see a bird that far away like that. Not that big.
Yeah. Anyway, they went zipping past Mount Rainier, and as he said, they flew in and out of the. Now, Mount Rainier is 14,400 feet high, but these things must have been at a level of around 6,000 to 7,000 feet, which is the top levels of most of the mountains of this Cascade chain. And he said they were going in and out of the mountain peaks and performing such abrupt maneuvers. He figured he couldn't imagine how human beings could stand these abrupt maneuvers as they turned to go in and out of the mountains.
Well, the G-force would be incredible.
Yeah, right. Anyway, as one of them, the first one crossed past the flank of Mount Rainier, he looked at his clock and it was 1:03. And he had already been seeing them for maybe half a minute to a minute as they flew from the far north to where he was, almost passing Mount Rainier. And then he noticed it was like 1:03 o'clock, and then he continued to pay attention to these things and look at them, and he turned his airplane to the right and was flying the same direction. Then he went southward, opened his window so there was no glass, no chance of reflections or whatever, and they looked just the same. They were flashing in the sun, he thought, reflecting sunlight, and because of that, because of their flashes, he was able to follow them all the way down to south to Mount Adams. And when he thought they were at Mount Adams, he looked at his clock, and it was 42 seconds after 3 o'clock. So these things had gone about 50 miles in a minute and 42 seconds, which he knew was fast.
Right.
But he didn't fully appreciate just how fast that was at this time as he's flying his airplane. Well, it's important to notice that he did the measurements. I have pointed out in the book that he was the right guy at the right place, the right time, and the right attitude. He had high credibility because of his business. Nobody thought he was going to be generating tall tales or hoaxing or delusional or whatever like that.
Right.
He was at the right time. If he hadn't delayed his flight to Yakima by looking for this crashed airplane on the side of the mountain, he might not have been there at the right time. But he was there at the right time to see these things go flying down on their trip from north to south. And at the right place, obviously, to be able to see them for a minute and a half or whatever. Somebody on the ground looking up might have seen them for a short period of time, but wouldn't have had time to make any measurements. Because Arnold was at altitude, 9,200 feet at the time of his sighting, he could see these things from the far north all the way to the far south, and that gives him a long time, a long distance on which to measure, a long time on which to look at these objects and try to decide what they were, and considerably a long time to make a measurement of speed. He also measured the angular size of the object, comparing the angular size of the DC-4 plane to the objects themselves. And I thought that they might have been 60 or so feet in size. And he also had the right attitude. Most people under a bizarre situation like that might just your jaw drops to the floor and you say "gaw, gaw, gaw" as things go zipping by, but you don't think they make a measurement. What? Make a measurement? See, you must be crazy. Arnold wanted to be a chemical engineer and went to the University of Minnesota for a period of time to do that, but ended up having to drop out because of a sports injury or something. I don't know exactly the details on all that, but the point is, he had a scientific attitude towards this, and that's evidenced by the fact that he actually made measurements of these objects as they went by, and he carefully paid attention to their shape he noticed that the next to last object had a circular front end, but a double concave crescent at the rear. There was nine objects, 8 of them that had the semicircular front and a convex triangle at the rear, and one that was different. So anyway, after they had gone past Mount Adams, he went and landed at Yakima, Washington, told some of his buddies, and although they, in a sense, didn't believe him, nevertheless, they didn't think that he was going to be, like I said, a joker or a hoaxer or a tall tale teller or whatever. And he figured out, he then went from Yakima, Washington to Pendleton. By the time he got to Pendleton, Oregon, some press people had heard about it and started interviewing him on what he had seen. And he said that during the time he flew from Yakima to Pendleton, he figured out better how fast they were going. And he couldn't believe the number that he came up with. And it says fudge the data to lower the speed number. If you actually calculate 102 seconds to go from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, it comes out 1,700 miles an hour. He couldn't quite believe that, so he, in essence, arbitrarily rounded it down to 1,200 miles an hour. And that's what caught the interest. Another point about being the right guy at the right place at the right time with the right attitude. He came up with his measurements, and that caught the interest of his pilot buddies, the speed that it was going. And he has been, one guy said, one pilot said that he had been told during the Second World War that they might see something like that. I think my interpretation of this is that some people knew that the Germans, the Nazis, were working on semicircular aircraft.
That's what I wondered when I read that part in the book.
The Horton brothers, and there was like one wooden model that was made for test purposes, and it's a far cry from that to having 9 operational units, shall we say, that they would dare fly in an area where somebody could see what was going on. It's an Area 51 type of problem where nobody gets to see what you're doing unless you're actually using this in war. So I don't consider the Nazi UFO theory to be a viable theory.
Well, you think if they would have had them, they would have won the war. You know?
Yeah, right. And you would think that if we had developed them based on Nazi war research or whatever, you would have seen a lot of semicircular aircraft flying around nowadays. They still can't do it.
Right.
The flying wing has a tough time flying, and couldn't work until they could use computer control for the control surfaces. Anyway, Arnold's story made it into the press because of his credibility, shall we say, and it was treated as a unusual thing, but in a straightforward manner. There was no ha initially. In a couple of days after the sighting, during that time he was interviewed by a number of newsmen, and somebody, one of the descriptions he gave was like if you skipped a saucer on the water when it was flipping and flashing and tilting back and forth and so on. And gradually that got morphed into a name for the object itself. It was supposed to be a description of what it looked like, but it became an official name, sort of a semi-official name of these objects, flying saucers. That's where the term generated right there, within a couple of days after Arnold's sighting, because of the way he described how they flew.
Not how they looked.
Yeah. he described how they looked too, but the flying saucer description was based on the way they flew.
Well, we got to go to our last commercial break really quick here. When we get back, I want to talk about how, I've been reading the book, how this 3 minutes, how much this first sighting really proves the existence of something extraterrestrial, at the same time how our U.S. government just wrote it off. Pretty much say it was unexplained. So when we get back for commercial, we'll talk about that. And I'd like to also, if we have time, we'll have phone lines open for people to call in and ask questions. All right, guys, we'll be back with you just after this last commercial break. Tonight we're talking with Dr. Bruce Maccabee. We've been talking about the Kenneth Arnold sighting, the sighting that coined the term flying saucer, kind of mistakenly. And we're going to talk tonight too about the 1947 UFO flap that kind of associated with that, is what I find really interesting, and more about the government cover-up, in my opinion at least. We'll see what Bruce says about it, of extraterrestrial life in these UFO sightings. All right, guys, be with you in just a sec. You still there with us, Bruce?
I'm still here.
Awesome. So you were talking about the Kenneth Arnold sighting and what he saw on that day in June. When reading the book, one of the things I notice about it is you say he's the right guy at the right place at the right time, and you can really tell that, because I think if I was up in a plane, I mean, of course he's an experienced pilot and all that, but even if I felt I was an experienced pilot and I saw these things flying, maybe, they're a distance off, I'd still be a bit nervous about something I didn't understand like that. But his scientific mind, he made the calculations, could show that they were going 1,200 to 1,700 miles per hour. That seems like, most people would, like you said, their jaws would have dropped. They would have just not made those calculations. So is this what drew you to this case, that this guy's scientific mind, just those 3 minutes, how much he documented?
Well, probably one of the first things I noticed when I wrote a series of papers on this way back in 1995 that were published in the International UFO Reporter, published by the Center for UFO Studies. And what had caught my interest was the explanations that were offered for his sightings. The explanations, some of them were clearly wrong, and none of them were very good. I've listed 14 explanations that have been offered over the years, starting in 1947, Kenneth Arnold offering his own first explanation. They were aircraft of the U.S. Air Force, some radical new design that he wasn't at all familiar with, but they had to be Air Force objects. So then I noticed that J. Allen Hynek had an explanation that was published. Basically, that was his explanation was large aircraft that were nearby, only 6 miles away, as opposed to being 20-some miles away. And then the guy who really went off the deep edge was Howard Menzel, famous astrophysicist, head of the Harvard Observatory, who proposed explanations in three books, one in 1953, a book in 1966, another book in 1973, and he proposed 2 explanations in the first book, 3 in the second, I think it was, and 1 in the third. And none of these explanations, they're all based on weather. Like, for example, he suggested that maybe Arnold was saying, billowing blasts of snow from the side of Mount Rainier. Well, Arnold saw these things from the far left, nowhere near. When he first saw them, they were nowhere near Mount Rainier. And, of course, if there had been billowing blasts of snow, there would have been lots of turbulence of the air, and Arnold would have noticed it in his airplane. I could go into a lot of detail, as you're probably aware now, of
Right.
These various explanations. One of it was clearly just plain stupid. The last explanation that he offered was that there was water drops on the windshield of Arnold's plane. And Arnold, in his report, clearly said he turned his plane sideways, opened the window, so there would be no glass between him and these objects. You can't have water drops on Arnold's eyeball, maybe. Would be the only
Right.
remotely similar thing. Now, the point is, Menzel had access to the documentation, and he just didn't even read it. One of the things that got my interest in this whole UFO subject back in the late 60s and early 70s was the fact that the Air Force, in particular, offered explanations that made no sense. In Kenneth Arnold's case, they claimed that it was a mirage. You can look up you can see that, and if you can find the table, essentially the table of contents for the Parking Blue Book file, a big long list of all the sightings that they've collected, and you look for the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and you see it's labeled a mirage. But the mirage explanation makes absolutely no sense in comparison with what Arnold reported. You'd have to. I noticed that very often the skeptics would modify the data or leave things out in order to make an explanation work. And in the mirage explanation, for example, mountaintop mirage, there is such a thing. If you're approximately at the altitude of the mountaintop, you can sometimes see a temperature inversion layer, which causes you to see the top of the mountain up above the actual top. It appears that it's above the actual top, and what you're actually looking at is the top of the mountain, an inverted image of it. Well, now, one thing about mountaintop mirages is they stay above the mountaintops. They don't go left and right at all. So the major first characteristic of these objects was that they were going laterally, they were going horizontally at a high speed. They weren't sticking above mountaintops the way mountaintop mirages. So I asked myself, how come the Air Force guys could get away with making such stupid explanations and not be fired?
Right.
And I decided that, well, as explained in the FBI CIA UFO book, General Vandenberg, in the fall of 1948, shot down the so-called estimate of the situation that had been written by the experts at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time. The experts in reverse engineering aircraft had concluded from studying a whole bunch of reports of flying saucers that these things are interplanetary, and they wrote a document that they called the estimate of the situation, which is a sort of generic term to describe a paper in which you try to estimate what's going on, make some guess as to what's happening, what to do about it, and so on. And they sent that to General Vandenberg, and he kicked it back, according to what we're told by Captain Edward Ruppelt, first head of Project Blue Book. And so the men from Wright Field went to Vandenberg's office in the Pentagon and tried to argue with him, and came out of there with their tails between their legs, I guess. At any rate, for whatever reason, he effectively said, you can't use interplanetary as an explanation for a UFO or flying saucer sighting. And that meant that they had to think of some other things, misidentifications, hoaxes, and delusions were the general classification of allowable explanations for sightings. Interplanetary was a knowable explanation up to the point where Vandenberg shot it down, at which point nobody would ever come up with interplanetary as an explanation. Now, you could say it was unexplained, but then if you said it was unexplained, you would also say, well, if we had more information about it, we could explain that one too.
Right.
So they had an out if you came up with an explanation that really seemed like really interplanetary. They'd say, well, if we had more information, we could explain that one too.
And I just want to real quick, sorry to interrupt, Bruce, too. I want to remind people, if you do want to call in and ask Bruce, I forgot to mention this after the break, is Soup Live Chat, 800 Live Chat is the Skype ID to call into the show. Jeff, the video engineer, will bring you on. You can have your video on, or you can turn it off, and you can ask him a question. One of the things, too, in this sighting, I've heard, flying geese, like we were talking about as explanation, meteorites, all that, there's the light. You talk about the light in the book, how bright the light would have been on the plane.
Yes, I was the first person to even comment about more than just simply saying, well, Arnold's explanation was that these things were so shiny on the top that when they tilted, they'd have to tilt about 60 degrees, but if they tilted enough, they would reflect the sun right onto the airplane. And he said, I was particularly intrigued by, not that it appeared to be bright when he was looking directly at the objects, but when he said that he first noticed a reflection on an increased brightness of the surfaces of his aircraft, a reflection off the surface of the aircraft. These are already illuminated by the sun and the skylight, so there must be a huge amount of light coming and hitting the airplane in order to make a noticeable change. And I don't know what that noticeable change, how much light that would take, but I was very conservative and said, well, I suppose if you could see a 1% change in the brightness of the aircraft surface, how bright would an object, how much sunlight would an object have to reflect towards Arnold's plane? So imagine when he first saw these things that they were like 50 miles, I'm guessing about 50 miles north of him. So if they were a mirror surface, tilted just right so sunlight would go and hit the mirror and then bounce from the mirror right over onto Arnold's airplane, how big would this mirror have to be able to get a 1% change in the brightness of the aircraft? And you have to be able to do some physics and optics in order to be able to do the calculations and come up with the answer I came up with is that any reasonable sized object, even if it were 100 feet in diameter, wouldn't be bright enough, wouldn't reflect enough sunlight to travel 50 miles and then hit Arnold's airplane and be bright enough for him to notice it. So the bottom line is, I'm guessing that maybe these weren't reflections of sunlight after all. But if you throw out the reflection of sunlight, then you have to say, well, what could it be? And it could be a beam of light of some sort, like a laser beam, that was beamed at his plane, intentionally or unintentionally hitting the airplane. And then that could be bright enough to for him to notice. And he also described it as being a bluish-white color and compared it with a welder's arc, which are blue from ultraviolet radiation and blue radiation.
So we do have a caller on the line right at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Zach on the line. He always has really good questions. How you doing tonight, Zach? Oh, and now we lost him. Go figure. Well, we'll see if he comes back on. We had him there for a second. It was Jeff, our video engineer. We actually lost our video engineer altogether, so he might be back in a second. When you talk about the blue arc of light coming off of it, you think it could be something to do with its propulsion system that could be making that kind of flash of light? I know it's speculation, but you wonder if these things give us clues to what it's using to pull off the maneuvers that they're doing.
Well, all I can say is that's a complete speculation, and it doesn't really. There's so little information that it doesn't really lead you to anything.
Right.
The I speculated that it could be an artifact or something to do with the propulsion, or it could be that they were doing something like we would do with radar, sending on a laser radar to keep track of where things are with respect to them, to make sure they don't run into something. Or it could be a means of signaling if they want to attract Arnold's attention. There were other people that day. Now, one of the things that was never really included in Arnold's, the Air Force and so on, didn't include in Arnold's, the data on Arnold. I think was that other people saw these things too. Of course, a very important guy was Fred Johnson. I don't know if you've gotten that far in the book.
No, but I know about it. I haven't gotten that far, but I know he was a prospector.
Yeah, a prospector on the side of Mount Adams. He wrote a letter to the Air Force saying that he was on the Mount Adams district at about 5,000 feet on the same day and the same time as Mr. Arnold. He had read about Arnold's sighting in the newspaper, and said that it took him several weeks or whatever to get back to civilization from wherever he was prospecting, and he read the article in the newspaper and decided he'd write to lend support to Mr. Arnold's case about observation of these objects. He said he saw them fly over his head, or flying overhead, and he had a compass with him, which he said the compass needle wobbled back and forth as these things went over, indicating some sort of a magnetic effect. Right when the first publicized UFO sighting has a physical effect attached to it, thanks to Mr. Johnson. He was then interviewed by the FBI, and they concluded that he seemed to be a reliable individual who knew what he was talking about. And then there were other people who also just saw flashes of light moving through the sky without being able to see exact shapes. They were too far away or whatever. This was the onset of a flap of sightings, which has been studied by Ted Blocher. He wrote a book called The UFO Wave of 1947, and it shows that there had been sightings off and on over the coming months of the springtime of 1947. But people who saw these things looked at them and said, well, there's something weird up there. The Air Force is doing weird stuff. We're so accustomed to having technological innovations occur that we don't understand. We'll just let it go by. So some meteorologists in Richmond, Virginia, who saw spherical object go zipping by as they were tracking with a balloon with their theodolite. Things like that, a number of sightings that occurred before Arnold's, but they weren't publicized. Nobody heard about them. The information, things that were flying through the air, was not general knowledge. Well, Arnold's sighting crystallized all this. When his sighting appeared in the newspaper, other people began to say, "Oh, hey, I saw something too," and if it just happened to be on the day of seeing it in the newspaper, they would report maybe to the newspaper on the next day, or they would say, "I saw something like that too a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or a month ago, or whatever." In other words, sightings that occurred before Arnold's sighting, as well as sightings that occurred afterwards, suddenly became something to publicize, and they appeared in newspapers.
Sorry, that's our Skype line coming in. They're a bit loud. Hold on, Jeff. You got coming in on audio here, really loud. All right, let me make sure.
Anyway, the sighting flap, there was, I think, like 20 sightings on the same day as Arnold sighting, and then the number of sightings per day increased, peaking in early July, over 100 sightings a day, and then dropping off about the time the Roswell case was publicized. There was a big fall off in the numbers of the sighting rate, and by the end of July, it was down to something like a few few per month or per week. I forget the exact numbers, but there was a big rise and a big fall, and sightings were reported from practically all over the United States and other parts of the world also during this big flap of sightings, which was characterized by Arnold's description of what he saw. A lot of the descriptions were nowhere near as good as Arnold's, but nevertheless is what started the whole thing off.
Let's see if we can get our caller on here. Let's see if Zach's working. You there with us, Zach? Hopefully Jeff got it.
Yep, I'm here, Jason. How you doing, man?
Doing great. You got a question for our guest?
Yep, I do have a question. Dr. Maccabee, it's an honor to meet you, sir. I do have this question because I took a look back in your history and I saw that you worked on, I believe they're called high-power beam control systems that were originally meant for the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Yes.
There's a popular conspiracy theory that goes around saying that the Strategic Defense Initiative was originally was actually thought of actually to counter any kind of extraterrestrial attacks on Earth, instead of the official story that it was meant to shut down Soviet nuclear missiles. Is there any truth to that conspiracy, in your personal opinion? Why or why not?
Well, you can bet that I would have been very sensitive to any hint of protection against extraterrestrials that have been built into any of the programs that I saw, that I was aware of. The one that I worked on had to do with space-based lasers, but there were other programs having to do with particle beams and ultra-fast rockets and stuff like that, as ways to shoot down missiles. None of the programs, and I attended a lot of program reviews. None of the reviews that I attended talked about protecting from stuff that was coming from the outside. It was all detection of, all based on detection of launched rockets or something from the Earth. And what do you do to shoot down a missile that's been launched, presumably towards the United States from Soviet Union? So all the surveillance satellites were looking at the Earth, the Earth and the atmosphere of the Earth, and all the weapons were presumed to be pointing towards the Earth, one way or another. As I said, I didn't see any plans for training high-power laser beams or any other type of weapon on objects that were out beyond the out beyond the orbits of the satellites themselves. These satellites would be orbiting a couple hundred miles up above the Earth. If there had been any hint of that, I would have noticed it immediately. But I didn't see any indication that people were worried about. There was no official worry about things coming from the outside. Now that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been some people who were taking that into account. But I never saw any. As I said, I never saw any plans that I could clearly say pointed towards anti extraterrestrials.
Do you have another question, Zach?
Yeah, I'll keep this one nice and short. Dr. Maccabee, if you can maybe give a theory as to what would be an explanation for this phenomenon. About 5 years ago, actually, I was driving on AZ Highway 87, actually, at about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was on the Gila River Reservation. I remembered looking south, actually, over at some radio towers that were up on a hill, and I see these bright circular lights. That's all I can really describe them as. They were near this radio tower. Immediately after I saw them, the one that was closest to the radio tower actually turned orange, and then the one that was furthest away from the radio tower turned a shade of light blue. And 3 seconds after the orange object, after the one closest to the radio tower, after it turned orange, it disappeared. And then another 3 seconds later, then the other object disappeared. And to this day, I don't have an explanation as to what I saw. Do you have a theory by any chance as to what could explain this phenomenon?
Well, you're probably aware, orbs of various types are rather common, I guess. My wife has seen them in Ohio years ago. Typically, you see a light of some color that appears for some reason you can't explain. She talked about a situation where a light appeared some distance away over a field. It seemed to be, and then it split into two, and they were side by side. And then I think she said these two split into two also, and then they all collapsed back to one. Other people have had other types of stories with various colors of lights, and I don't really know. That's a whole subject of study by itself, is these orbs. Now you have to be careful not to mix up what I call flash orbs. I have a paper on my website all about the situation of flash orbs. A flash orb is a little image created in a picture when you use a flash, and the flashlight, the light from the flash bounces off small dust particles that are in the air right in front of the lens. And they create these little images, little round, typically round images. If you had a square aperture in your camera, you'd get squares instead of round, but most camera apertures are round. I had a Polaroid camera that had a elliptical aperture, and it created dust orbs that were elliptical in shape. Essentially what you're really doing is creating a shadow graph of the aperture that lets light into the camera. But these dust orbs are only detectable in the camera when you have a flash. If you have orbs that you can see with your naked eye, or you can photograph without a flash, then you got something. I don't know what, but you got something.
You got something. We actually showed one, Bruce. My news segment, The World Wide Web of Weird, the last thing we showed was one that was filmed at night with night vision, but you could, I mean, it was bright, very bright emitted light. I mean, and it was big. And it's one of those places where they get a lot of what they call like ghost lights like that.
Yeah.
I find it very fascinating and interesting, but to me, it's something that, it doesn't look like it could be a ship of some kind. It's something truly peculiar. Well, thank you, Zach, for calling in and sharing that story with us tonight.
Oh, no problem, Jason. Thank you so much for calling in, and thank you so much, Dr. Maccabee, as well, for answering my questions, man. I greatly appreciate it, and I admire all the work that you've done.
Hope you get my books. FBI, CIA, UFO Connection, Abduction in My Family, and now 3 Minutes in June.
Which you can find all these books on, of course, Amazon.
Right.
Like I said, I'm reading 3 Minutes in June right now, and I'm loving it. And definitely want to get the other books. The FBI, CIA, UFO Connection is another interest of mine. There's a lot of, I want to read that book because it's interesting to think about what was going on between the Air Force and the FBI, especially during J. Edgar Hoover's time and power in the FBI. He was the type of person who wanted to know anything information-wise, that he collected information. So his interest in what was going on with the whole UFO thing, to me, is, fascinating.
Well, his interest doesn't really count a lot in there.
Really?
But it does, in March of 1950, after, what was this? Oh, well, I point out that the Air Force publicly was always poo-pooing the whole subject.
Right.
Privately, they were sending around requests for information. Whoop.
That was somebody calling in on the wrong line. If you're trying to call into the show, guys, it's only the Soup Live Chat 800 Live Chat Skydeck ID, not the OOJ Bland OO. That's not on tonight, guys. So call in the Soup Live Chat 800 Live Chat. Go on. Sorry about that, Bruce.
The Air Force would send out a request for information sheet citing request for information on sightings and stuff, and the FBI would get one of these documents saying we want information. Then the Air Force would publicly say we're not interested in the subject. It's not of interest. There's nothing to it. And then then the FBI would receive another request for information, and then the Air Force would again publicly make some comment that there's nothing to it. This running hot and cold for the Air Force, I guess, puzzled Hoover. In March of 1950, he had his asked one of his liaison with the Air Force, what really is the opinion of the Air Force? And so the liaison guy goes to the Air Force, and he's told by these two colonels that, well, we've explained everything and there's nothing to it. We've shut down the project. And then another couple of months later, the Air Force, the FBI gets a document saying, here's the type of information we want to know whenever a sighting is reported. In other words, it's blowing hot and cold, and I mean, what was a poor FBI man to think anyway?
Right.
The Air Force publicly poo-pooing the whole thing and privately saying, we want all the information you got. Now also, in 1952, the big flap, I'm thinking of writing a book called 1952, The Year of the UFO. It's also the year of the UFO, the extraterrestrial theory had final nails driven into the coffin of the ET hypothesis, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And the summer of 1952 was the largest flap year ever. And notable amongst the thousands of sightings were the sightings over the Washington, D.C. area.
Right.
And which essentially forced the Air Force to come up with some commentary on what was going on, how come all these sightings, and in particular over Washington, the restricted areas over Washington, D.C. on 2 weekends, and second and third and fourth weekends in July of 1952. And to get the press off their backs, you might say, they held a press conference, and General John A. Sanford, who was the director of Air Force Intelligence at the time, held this press conference, and in his initial statement, he said that there are credible people reporting incredible things, and then he said, but we consider it to be our job to explain this stuff, and we've been pretty well explained pretty much everything already, and with a little bit more effort, we expect to be able to explain everything else. And as far as he was concerned, it seemed to be all weather, based on in particular the radar detections over Washington D.C. seemed to be results of weather, temperature inversions and stuff that caused the radar beams to bend down towards the Earth.
Seems like
anyway,
a go-to response.
He was basically a weatherman. It's all the weather. The next day, the newspapers echo that. I forget oh, I know. It was all hot air, basically. But the point is that there were so many sightings. If he had said, yeah, this is real stuff, folks, there's nothing really going on, he would have had a lot of backup. Instead, he poo-pooed the whole thing and shot it down, and the Air Force thought, well, if we can have all these sightings, sighting reports, if we have all these sighting reports, but the Air Force says there's nothing to it, we may as well go ahead and go away and do something else. And sure enough, that was pretty effective.
Yeah. We do have another caller on the line. This is what I'm just trying to get through before Rhodey is on the line. Are you there with us, Rhodey?
I am here.
How you doing tonight? You have a question
Can
for
you
Bruce?
hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
I do. Okay, I'm sorry, Jason. I do, and I'm sorry I've been trying for like 25 minutes, so if you've answered this, I apologize in
No
advance,
problem.
but it's a two-parter. If you could tell us what is the most amazing thing that you've seen that you can't give an explanation to, and I know you believe in some government cover-up from what you were just saying, but how deep and how vast, with your military background and that knowledge, how deep and vast do you think it is going, and what are they covering up?
Well, I think they're
How deep and
effectively covering up,
think it,
covering up.
what are they covering?
Hold up, Rody. Let him
Huh?
talk.
Well,
All right, go ahead, Bruce.
they're covering up the reality of the situation, going all the way back to Kenneth Arnold's sighting, and why they're covering it all up is a matter for speculation. Of course, you can speculate based on UFO sightings that UFO, flying saucer, UFO sightings, whatever you want to call them, represent other intelligences interacting with our universe, the Earth, whatever. But this I deduce from all these attempts at poo-pooing sightings and presenting explanations that make no sense. The Air Force itself was sort of self-confused. I think of it in terms of almost like brainwashing the people who were stuck with the problems of people who were members of the Project Blue Book were stuck with the problem of coming up with explanations, and sometimes they had to make explanations that they realized were totally stupid. But I arrive at the conclusion that and if you're a skeptic, any explanation is better than none. And so they went with explanations which made no sense because they were better than having no explanation at all. And they knew that the scientific community probably would not dispute their explanation. Like Menzel talking about billowing blasts of snow coming off the side of the mountain, which would make absolutely no sense at all because Kenneth Arnold flew his airplane south of the mountain just minutes after these billowing blasts of snow had gone by, if they had been billowing blasts of snow.
Right.
And he would have known that with his airplane bouncing around that, gee, something's going on here. No, I don't know if I answered that lady's question or not.
Yeah, you
That makes
did.
sense to you,
You
Rudy?
did, and yes, it does. And thank you very much. I found this really interesting tonight. You didn't really believe in UFO stuff till a couple of years ago. Jennifer in the chat room and her husband got me kind of
Well,
believing. But anyway,
if anybody tells you that you're wrong, give them a copy of this book to read and let them figure it out for themselves.
I will.
I've produced
I will,
all the
and I
data
have-
in the book.
It's very detailed.
Yeah, no, I'm going to order a copy of that book. Yeah.
It's worth it.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Dr. Bruce.
Thank you for calling.
Thanks, Rody. You have a great night.
But you too, Jason. Bye, honey.
Bye. Yeah, the amount of detail you go into the book. I mean, we've talked tonight a couple times. You said, well, that would be speculation. You don't speculate. You it's like just the facts, ma'am. Kind of that's kind of how you deal with it. That's what I like
Right.
about it. It's very straightforward. And when you're dealing with people that are very skeptical, your approach is exactly the kind of thing you have to be like, okay, well, this is the facts of the situation. So that's why I'm loving 3 Minutes in June. That changed the world. Because there's still to this
Well, you
day.
have to go back after you finish. The ending part is, why did I write this book? And I explained that I realized that, as I said, Kenneth Arnold was the right guy to be at the right place at the right time with the right attitude. And the more I studied the study, the more I realized this is all you really need is one. Even the skeptics admit that all you really need is one unexplainable sighting, And Philip Glass had often told me that if the ufologists could get together on one sighting, then that would be the one they could make their case on. And as I thought about it, I realized you can't call Kenneth Arnold a copycat. There hadn't been anything before him that was publicized. So you end up with a situation that you take his descriptions of what's going on as the literal truth. Everything that he says about these objects is stuff that is reasonable to imagine that he could see and remember what they look like and so on. So, considering the overall importance of this sighting, I start off the book with 3 minutes is not a long time, but it's long enough for a flight of strange objects to send a message. And the message is, you are not alone. And that continues all the way to the very end.
And that's why I'm loving the book, because I've had guests on here that are very informative. They've had experiences with UFOs or aliens and stuff like that, but it's their experiences. This is, to me, the bare bones. Like I said, it's like a detective kind of thing. You're getting the information, you're working it out, you're piecing it back, you're reworking what happened to him, and to me, it's just that is how you ultimately prove that there is something going on in our skies. There's something extraterrestrial. This wasn't a government. There's no way we had any kind of technology like that could go 1,700 or even 1,200 miles per hour, and for a human to even withstand those kind of G-forces.
The top speed at that time was about 700 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in September of 1947 at 740 miles an hour, or whatever the speed is. So they were already going 1,000 miles an hour faster than the fastest stuff we had.
One more time before we go here, what is your website again, so people know?
Brumac.mysite.com. BRUMAC.MYSITE.com.
And you can check out his books on Amazon. I have a number of his books listed in the description of this Facebook event you guys can find there. Highly recommend. I'm reading 3 Minutes in June. I'm going to be finished with it soon. I love the book. Thank you so much, Bruce, for coming on the show tonight. It was truly informative.
I appreciate the invitation, and very nice talking.
It was really great. And like I said at the beginning, it was really honored to have you on tonight, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have a great night, Bruce.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you for watching tonight. Next week, we're going to have another show about aliens. This is going to be a little more up close and personable. It's by Chad Dillard and Alta Dillard. It's called Abducted. They were abducted by aliens in Louisiana. We're going to have them on to talk about that. That will probably go down more speculation rabbit hole, but this is these people's experience. I'm reading their book as well while I'm reading 3 Minutes in June. Both very interesting. We'll talk about how they lost time and weird circumstances and synchronicities. I mean, they lived a strange life. So that'll be next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. 10 p.m. to midnight Central or 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next week.